the commencement of the revelation of the Lord unto his servant Muhammad, when the Spirit of the Lord called out to him from within the vicinities of Mecca. When the Spirit rose and was at the highest horizon, then he drew nearer and approached, until when he was at a distance of about 2 to 3 meters or even nearer, then the Lord inspired unto his servant what he inspired, saying, Read in the name of thy Lord who created. He created the human being from a clinging substance. Read, for thy Lord is the most noble, honorable, and generous, the one who taught by the pen. He taught the human being what he did not know. Yet still, the human being transgresses indeed, in that he sees himself in no need. Truly, though, to thy Lord is the return indeed. Such was the first encounter between the prophet and the divine, for the mind did not lie in what it saw, and he truly did see the angel of the Lord on yet another occasion during his descent, when the angel was by the lote tree, right next to the garden of delight, covered by whatever was covering it. In that moment, the sight of the messenger did not waver in what it saw, nor did it transgress. He truly did see of the great wonders of the Lord, and soon after, the revelation of the Lord would pour into his heart and mind, which he would go on to propagate amongst his people, as he had been taught by one, mighty in power, trustworthy, possessing grandeur and an esteemed position among the higher council. He is sanctified before the Lord of the throne, and he is obeyed by all those who were put under his command. The prophet did behold him in all his grandeur, decked out in splendor, truly awe-inspiring indeed. When he descended a second time to relay unto the servant of the Lord what the Lord had commanded, and so he called out to him, saying, O thou who is clothed up and engaged, arise and warn. And as for thy Lord, thou art to make great and magnified. As for thy garments, thou art to make clean and sanitized. And as for fragilities and vulnerabilities, thou art to avoid. And do not confer a favor in order to seek more. And for the sake of thy Lord should thou be patient. For when the horn shall be sounded, then on that day, that will truly be a difficult day indeed. Upon the unfaithful ingrates shall there be no ease. Thus, the prophet arose from whence he was, and he began proclaiming the truth of his Lord unto his people. He was to proclaim the word of the Lord to such an extent that the name of God would be the only name that is echoed, adored, and venerated throughout the streets above all other names. As for his garments and clothing attire, he was to keep clean and pure from impurities and filth. And as for those things which would cripple him and cause him to stumble and lose his way, such as idols and bad influential figures, he was instructed to avoid and discard. This he was supposed to do. For when the horn shall be sounded for the commencement of the day of resurrection, that day will be a hard and terrible day for a lot of people, especially for those who behave unfaithfully with respect to their Lord and do not heed his warnings. But when the prophet had proclaimed his message to them, they immediately denounced him and made a mockery of him. They attributed insanity, demon possession, and madness to him, and they accused him of wanting to seize power from them. Moreover, they scripted lies about him, propagating them throughout the entire regions, defaming his character, and abjuring people to not listen or follow the message of their Lord. They issued threats and compromises to him, but he persisted in his calling. But this would later on begin to get to him. He did not understand why his people had so suddenly shifted their stance on him. They constantly mocked him, berated him, taunted him, and humiliated him with every chance they got. A beloved member of the community he was no more. It also did not help matters that the one constant he thought he had by his side had temporarily cut off communications with him. It seemed like there was nowhere for him to turn but to face the backlash. His people constantly pestered him, inquiring of whether his Lord had abandoned him. He thought maybe he had not done a good enough job, and maybe his Lord was displeased with him or his efforts. On top of that, he contemplated the idea that perhaps what had transpired with him had been a dream or imagination. Very early at dawn, he was awoken to the relief of the buzzing words of the Lord. His Lord had finally made contact, and nothing could ever compare to the relief and joy he felt. Heavy indeed were the words, but what beauty they conveyed. For therein the Lord stated, "By the early dawn, by the night when it becomes dark and still, thy Lord has indeed not abandoned thee, nor does he harbor resentment towards thee. For truly, thy future is surely going to be better for thee than the former, as thy Lord is indeed going to give thee, so that thou become pleased. Did he not find thee fatherless and sheltered thee? And he found thee aimless, but yet he directed and guided thee, and he found thee in need, and so he enriched thee? Now, as for the fatherless, then thou art to not be domineering and shrill, and as for the beggar, then thou art to not be harsh or repellent, but with the favor of thy Lord are thou to communicate and promulgate." Such were the reassuring words of the Lord unto his servant, which thankfully came at a moment when they were most needed. The beautiful words pulsated through the prophet's body like the buzzing of bees. Despite the words being heavy and taxing upon the prophet, he thoroughly enjoyed this round of the revelation pouring through his chest. When the revelation of the Lord had concluded, the prophet could not help but tell all those whom he saw that his Lord had indeed not forgotten about him. For in the revelation, the Lord had taken oaths by both the dawn and the night. For just as these two phenomena are self-evident, so were the following proclamations of the Lord. For the Lord had proclaimed that he in fact had not abandoned his servant, nor did he harbor any resentment or ill will towards him. But that though the night can be so dark and still, and can seem almost non-ending, the dawn is eventually going to follow. The dark times would eventually pass, and a brighter future would eventually ensue, and the prophet's life would take a similar pattern. His life may have been hard at the time, or almost hopeless like the stillness of the night, but that was going to change, as his future was poised to be better than his former life. Similarly, the prophet was instructed to not forget his life's journey and the hardships he had gone through. He was to remember that he had been an orphan, but the Lord had granted him shelter. He had been aimless, but the Lord guided him. He had been lacking, but the Lord enriched him. Thus, the mere thinking that the Lord could have abandoned him or been resentful towards him would have been out of the question, since the Lord had been right there with him throughout all his life's toughest challenges, supporting him and grooming him for his upcoming ministry. So just as the Lord had been favorable to him, then he too was not to forget others who might be in a similar position. He was to not disregard or be domineering towards the orphan, and to not be harsh or repulsive in his treatment of the beggar, for he too had come from humble beginnings, and so, now that he had the favor of the Lord, he was to promulgate that favor unto the people. Moreover, in fulfillment to his promise unto his servant from the previous revelation about his future, the Lord follows up the previous revelation by giving the prophet a glimmer of hope regarding his future. In this fourth encounter with the divine, the Lord declares, "Have we not expanded thy chest for thee? And we laid off of thee thy burden, the one which was weighing down thy back? And we elevated thy reputation for thee? For indeed, with hardship there must also follow ease. Truly, with hardship there must indeed follow ease. So, when thou have become exhaustively drained, then keep thou to the straight thinking, and towards thy Lord should thou be longing." In this revelation, not only did the Lord remind the prophet of some of the favors which the Lord had done for him, such as expanding his chest and making it more open and accommodating, relieving him of the burden which had been weighing down on him so heavily, and lastly, raising his reputation. The Lord had finally removed the burden which was weighing on the prophet. The feeling of inadequacy and the shame that he felt had tainted his reputation in the society. He had been labeled a liar, a madman, and a fool by the people, and he thought there would be no way back from such accusations. The feeling of loneliness and abandonment had started to creep up to him. Suddenly, he felt like that same young orphaned child who had nobody to turn to and who felt unwanted by anyone. He longed for the comfort of someone being by his side, yet when he came to his people with the message, they treated him like a stranger in his own land. Though rejected by the majority, he did manage to win a few followers to his side, who helped him in his cause to spread the word of God, and who aided him in the rise of his reputation amongst the people, for he had been known as an upright resident of the community even prior to the message. But with the message, his reputation grew even the more.